Hey there, welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Karen.
And I'm Jonelle.
Together we're diving into real, unfiltered conversations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, privilege, and inherited patterns. We're here to challenge norms, unpack our privilege, and foster empathy. Through raw, intergenerational dialogue, it's not always easy, and we don't always agree, but we show up anyway.
Yes, we do.
Hey, Jonelle.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
Good. Did you do your reflection on a colonial mindset?
Oh, yeah. Oh, what about you? You go first.
Actually, I think it's because it was my subject last time. It was kind of a little bit more my frame of reference. I have really taken on the ideas of power and greed.
Okay.
And in the end, we also talked about this language of imagination. So if we're looking at things like power and greed, how can we change the way we inherently think? Like why is it that I always think I need to be on the top, like be greater than someone, even language like the best. Usually when we use the language of the best means that someone is not as good.
Yeah.
So I can't think of I shouldn't say I can't think of one specific situation. I've been just listening to so many podcasts, reading so many books. And I'm reading a really good book right now called Nice Racism by Robin DiAngelo, and it's for white progressives. It's so good. But anyways, so I've just been really trying to reframe when I use language like great or best or better, it's comparative.
Yes.
And it tries to put me in the space of power. And so how can I live my life with a different kind of narrative?
Well, and I think it's so interesting you say that, because that is such the capitalist system. They're always pitting people against each other, or the colonial system. And but statistically, it's not possible for everyone to be the best. Statistically, we're always going to have an average, a lower than average, and above average. And yet we look at being average or below average as a negative. And sometimes in life, you're not going to be the best at everything.
No.
And so I think it's so much healthier to embrace that, I'm definitely lower than average in this place. I would say my gardening skills. I am improving every day, but I am not better than best gardening skill. And I'm okay with that. The thing is, I'm okay because I'm still enjoying it. There's nothing wrong. I'm still producing things, but I'm not going to win any competitions.
But even that put you on a scale of evaluation. And why isn't that point. You could simply, and I'm working on this, because one of the things that I've learned about my whiteness, and especially the systemic whiteness of white women is this language of competing with one another. And so I had a situation where a friend I perceived it as outperforming me.
Ooh.
And I had to step back from my colonial mindset of power and greed and say, we're all in this together. We're all working towards growing and curiosity and learning. Just because they're learning something that might be different than I'm learning doesn't mean that we need to compete with each other on that space. And so anyways, that evaluative system. And it goes so deep. I mean, the more I learn about our histories, the more that we have been so shaped by better, greater taking and greed. And I also, actually, the greed one, let me go the colonial mindset about greed and scarcity. I'm really trying to reframe my thoughts so I don't have a scarcity mindset. And what I mean by scarcity is there's a finite amount of time.
Yes.
There's a finite amount of money.
Ooh.
There's a finite, and I'm trying to look at, all the abundance around me. So, and how things can can work into an abundant space. So anyways, this is my little menial way of trying to understand how I was shaped by my colonial patterns.
No, and you actually, you'd never even guessed that you didn't know the topic, but you did a
Oh,
great tie-in to today's topic. Today, I want to talk about white female friendship.
oh, great.
And there's so much unpack there. And before we kind of start talking about things, I want to clarify this does not reference any of my current friend groups. I would say some of the negativity or the toxic patterns that I'm going to talk about. They may be friends in the past that I've experienced this or heard from other people, but I want to be very clear, like, for those of you out there who I've kept in my inner circles, like, I've worked very hard to curate very healthy relationships.
You have.
And it doesn't mean that we don't get in, there's always some toxic patterns that may unfold, but like, for the most part, these are really healthy people who are growth, who are working on themselves, who care about people. And so I just want to put that out there that any examples I use, I am not speaking about current friends who I know we have some great listeners out there. But yeah, I want to unpack female friendships.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. To give some context to this or to the audience, I'm in an interesting place in life. I've been feeling my scarcity mindset has been around connection.
Yeah.
I've been really feeling a lot of lack of connection lately. It's interesting. I was talking to my therapist about this week, about how so many people were so lonely in the pandemic, and I reflected on it recently. I was actually lonelier after the pandemic than I was inside the pandemic, and I think it's because there's been a big change in my friend groups. As I have not had so much luck in love, most of my friends have continued to build their families and with marriages and kids and all of this. And the pandemic was really in that middle spot of kind of where the end of a lot of my like 20 somethings like consistent social circle was. And so coming out of the pandemic, it's like all of a sudden most of my friends were in these spaces that they had a brand new circle around them filled with kids and family and different priorities. And I love that for them, but it's definitely kept me kind of in this lonelier space, like continually seeking connection. And so because of that, I kind of just I've really learned a lot about female connection and some of the toxicity that like we have been bred to bring in our relationships. And so I kind of want to put that context there and open it up with your thoughts a little bit. But this is much more an open back and forth about our experience with female friendships and why do we do this to ourselves, guys?
Yeah. It's interesting that you should bring this topic up because I think since doing this podcast and doing a lot of research, I mean, I think about even in the beginning of this podcast, ladies, I didn't even know first and second wave feminism. My understanding of history was so off. So, but I've learned a lot. So we're talking about friendship. I've
Yeah.
learned a lot. Number one, one thing that I've learned that I've taken into my friendships, and I'm really trying to work on myself around this, is so when we say whiteness and white women, we're talking about inherited values. I'm not
Yeah.
talking about individuals,
No.
even though individually we can own it. So one of the things that they say is part of and who's they? Grandma used to say that all the time, who's they? But they say, or the researchers have said that white women relationships tend to be very competitive.
Yes.
And I didn't think about it in that language before.
Yeah.
I thought about it more in the language of, oh, I'm really comfortable with them or I'm not as comfortable with them.
Yeah.
And I've started thinking more about who I'm not comfortable with. And typically, who I'm not as comfortable with is someone that I feel like, in a way, I'm competing, or it's always like they did this and then they did that, and it's one up and one up and one up. And so, what I've trying to do is I'm trying to be more generous in
Yeah.
that what I mean by generous is when I get the first instinct of a competitive side, I'm trying to own that that's my inherited bias, my
Yes.
inherited culture. That's what I've been taught to do by my colonial ancestors. Um, and instead of entering this space like, why did they do it that way? Or why did they say that? That I'm trying to be more generous, like, your perspective brings me value.
Yeah.
So that is one area. And again, I don't know if I've developed any intimacies from that, but I'm
Interesting.
trying, maybe it's a bigger generosity towards myself,
Yeah.
actually, really. And it's funny because my friend who I may have been competitive, or my friends or whoever that I felt this competition with, may never even notice that. I don't know. But I noticed it as competition simply because of what I've learned from all of our research.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. Is competition, they do say,
And that's comparisons, that's
yeah,
all the above.
competition is definitely, so they say some of the biggest things that happen in white female friendships versus even like male friendships or even like other women of color, and these are generalities, is like white women, kind of like we do in the workforce, we're taught to compete against each other. We're taught two core things younger is be nice and compete. And so like
Mhm.
and a lot of that competition used to stem out of like finding the best man, like mating. And so we
Oh,
were always
yep.
competing to find the best man and politeness. And so a lot of those tendencies though to gossip, to single out people, to a lot of those behaviors, very passive aggressive behaviors, have continued on in cycles. And I also think there's an interesting place around we learn as white people to center ourselves, and white women, we continue to center ourselves. And again, these are generalizations, but center ourselves in our relationships as well. And so it's like, so an interesting thing that I kind of learned recently, or someone had brought up, is the whole kind of stay at home, this whole trad wife
Yeah.
movement. And here's the deal, I'm not against the trad wife movement. I think the core of feminism is being able to have the power to choose what you want to do in life. Like
And
what
resources
and
and
resources.
systems. Yeah.
Totally. But like just I mean, choice is literally feminism. Like we have the choice to do what we want. And so I don't disagree with the trad wife lifestyle, but I think what's interesting is I heard this creator on TikTok comment about how it is such a white woman's issue is because people of color have never had a place to go back to not working.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
it was white women who didn't work, but women of color have worked every generation.
Yeah.
And so
And wait, real quickly, isn't it funny too how we defined work? Because it's not
well,
like a woman who lived on a farm wasn't working. She
or
was
it's not like
working all,
motherhood's not
yeah,
work.
yeah. I mean, but yeah, it's like outside of the home.
Yeah.
Anyways, go
But
on.
what I think's so
Yeah.
interesting is so still as a society though, we pit ourselves against this. And what I've seen even with friends, and it's both sides go, is there's either friend groups who soar in motherhood and they forget their single friends. Or there's that one or two mothers who have a chunk of single friends who've completely forgotten them because we've centered ourselves and we centered where we're at in life and we're not checking in on those people. So I'm not saying either one is right, but it's this continued centerness. And there's also this like these stages in life that people are supposed to go through. And if you go through them at different paces than other friends, it's fascinating how you can kind of be left behind
Yeah.
and stuff. And so again,
Well, I want to speak into that.
yeah,
It's interesting. It's also it's the language. I really hate this word, the language of marginalization. Um, but it really is because if you fit in,
yeah,
if you have sameness, in fact, Jonelle and I were laughing. We both have the same color shirt on
because
today. We're
it's
like,
so hot
what
in
is
Seattle
what
today.
is it with sameness that people like, right? But it's funny because if you fit in, so like you have a couple kids or you have a spouse or whatever, we're attracting, right?
Yeah.
But anytime there's some difference,
Yes.
and it's kind of funny because it goes both ways. Because after the sameness gets old, we want difference. So
Yeah.
then all of a sudden we reach out to someone or someone that is different than us because we're sick of the old, right?
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. Like, why can't we be more intentional
Yeah.
about incorporating each other
Yeah.
more often?
Well,
Yeah.
and then what's so other things that I kind of learned, which I think is more interesting too, which again, none of this is new, but it kind of compiles into this female friendship is women really lean on friendship for emotional
Yeah.
closeness and stuff. And so they have much higher expectations around their friendships. But again, I need to find where it said this, like women, people of color tend to like, so Black women tend to not rely on, there's more of a camaraderie than the competition. And because of that, the emotional, and again, it's not to say that there's
Yeah.
not toxic things that don't happen in every friendship, but the emotional, what is the word I'm looking for? The emotional like dependency they have on the friends is very different. It tends to be, studies have shown, these are generalized, it tends to be for more of a build the group up mentality
Mhm.
than kind of leave the weaker herd behind. Whereas in the white women, it's very like source out the weaker herd and leave them behind mentality, which doesn't in a nutshell explain white feminism right there.
Well, actually, it's so interesting when I'm using really a colonial mindset, a mindset of slave owner.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think one of the things, and again, a therapist would probably, or a sociologist would have a heyday with us. But one of the things that is really part of our embedded histories is kind of the awful things we've done to people
Yeah.
and how we've done them for the sake of power
Yeah.
and for greed. And I wonder if because we haven't come innocent to the table in our communities,
Yeah.
if this has shaped us in a bigger
Oh,
way. And
definitely.
so there's always, they use the language like white defense, or there's always a sense of justification. Well, I'm
Yeah.
doing this because,
Yeah.
rather than when someone is living loving and living kindly, you don't need to justify that. You can just be generous, Anyways, but you did say something. There's two things that you said that I would like to comment
Yeah.
on that I have since learned in doing our studies on this podcast. And one of which is and again, we heard this in that book, White Women,
Yes.
by Regina
Such a good book.
Jackson. I forget her anyways, by Regina Jackson, and she has a co-author that's amazing. Her book, she talks about white women always talking behind each other's back.
Yes.
It's a pattern that we do. So in other words, I've been there, you've been there.
Yeah. We've all.
I don't know if our listeners have been there. We have a lot of male listeners. I don't know if you've been there. But this idea of if a friend isn't in the room, we talk about them.
Yeah.
We don't always talk bad about them, but we talk about them, or we do talk bad about them. If a friend leaves the room, we talk about them. If we're on the phone with another girlfriend or a friend, we talk about someone else.
Yeah.
And we might use language like we're observing them, or we're concerned, or we're praying for them. But one thing I've learned in this is that's not normative. That kind of behavior
Well,
of
normative is a tough
talking,
word because it is normative.
it's normative in the white culture.
It's not healthy. It's normative,
It's
but it's not
normative in
healthy.
white culture.
Yeah.
And so whether it's normative in persons of color culture, I don't know, but it's normative in white culture.
Yeah.
And so this is another area, if I'm truly going to work on myself and do some internal work, I'm really trying to figure out what that looks like in a healthy way. And so, go on. I don't know if you want to
No,
talk about that at all.
no, I think it's really interesting that you bring that up because it is a form of, like, inclusion, and, there's a couple things around this, like, so the most recent season of The White Lotus kind of really talked about this. If anyone watched that, they understand that there's a dynamic of 3 friends who are all in different places in their life of power and this, and they're all getting back together, and the typical triangle of the 3 is one night, 2 of them are talking about the other one, and then another night they're siding with the other one, and it is this inherited pattern of a lot of white female friendships of this nice to face, but there's a lot of, again,
Nice to face.
yeah, like, inherited power struggles within the group, and I wanna say, I think like, gossip actually penetrates itself through all female
Yeah.
relationships. So this is not necessarily a white woman only
Well, I was surprised to
situation.
hear that in the
So,
book, that is a predominant white
well,
that it's
the
a it
predominant whiteness one is more so gossip is different than as a whole versus what the white women do, which is still baiting for competitive, like, place in the group.
yeah.
Like, and so what white women gossip do, it's passive aggressive versus
Yes.
gossip. So actual gossip, I found this out recently that historically gossip was because gossip started because women didn't have direct communication
Mhm.
to all women. Like a lot of men, they were kept in the household or they weren't put out in groups where like the men could go to salons or,
Yeah.
whatever,
You
have
only
their
really got to
business.
do that once a week at
Yeah, and so
church or your
gossip
communities.
started happening because women could only see, like, one woman, and so it was basically information train
Yeah.
passed to so it's not necessarily gossip doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, it can be an information train, but I think the gossip that you're speaking of is the white
Yeah.
women, specifically the inherited negative,
The
passive
judgment.
aggressive, the
The
judgment, the
judgment.
singling
Yeah.
out,
They did
not
this
the
wrong. Why did
information.
they do this with their kids? They
Yes,
should have thought of that and, listen,
totally.
I have a lot of practice on it, right?
Yeah,
I can say it real quick.
yeah, and so anyway, I mean, like and so anyways, all of this kind of made me start thinking is because I do think as a whole, women we're trying to find our voice in this
Mhm.
world, and
Yeah.
I think, past generations found their voice competing against men, and I think this is a little bit of where we've gotten here is again, it's the competing sense, and so you have this generation, I hate to say it, a lot more of your generation who is still very passive aggressive in their friendships, and I'm not saying that we don't see that in my generation, we definitely do, but I also think there's this, like, next segment and movement of trying to have these, like, flowing, transparent, authentic relationships, and it's really interesting. I actually went to a friendship workshop recently.
I loved it.
So again, looking for connection in life. I love my friend groups. We're in different places in life, and I'm not always included in all of their events, and so trying to find more friends, and, went to this friendship workshop, and it was, people of all sorts of walks of life and really fun. We had a great time, but it was really interesting. Every single person there, when asked, like, what are your deal breakers or like, what is the
Mhm.
core that you're looking for in relationships? And most people said authenticity.
Yeah.
There's this sense of authenticity and like not a complaciveness, like really just wanting to be yourself, like not being who you think this person likes, but truly just being yourself and then reciprocating friendship, not being complacent in that friendship, but actually being a participant in that. And
Yeah.
so I just thought it was so interesting because I do think we all genuinely want the same thing from friends, and yet we're falling flat. Like, so statistically right now there's a male epidemic of loneliness, but actually my therapist like was talking about going further. We have an epidemic of loneliness across the board.
Yeah.
People are incredibly lonely right
Seniors.
now.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
seniors, even boomers who kids like are out of the house. I mean, millennials who are in drastically different
Yeah.
spaces. And so it's interesting because, again, at the core, we're really looking for authenticity. We're looking to connect. We're looking for that deep level of like friendship. Like, think back to your, like, I think of my best friend in high school,
Yeah.
Amanda, and our just dedication
Yeah.
to each other, your
Yeah.
one-mindedness kind of thing, or my college roommates and, like, how we were so connected at the hip and, still craving some of that in life, and so it just yeah,
Well, you said 2 things that they said in this friendship thing. You
workshop.
talked about authenticity and talked about, was it dedication?
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
authenticity.
recent
Yeah. Well, I wanna speak to the authenticity part because I think it speaks to 3 things. First of all, myself, as a white woman, was taught to be nice.
yeah,
Okay. Not that not being nice isn't a good thing, but I was nice in place of my authentic
yeah,
words.
yeah.
And so my niceness was replaced by passive aggressiveness. So I was nice, but I was nice in a way that I wasn't articulate of what I
You
was
could speak
actually
to your
feeling.
own needs, and so
Yeah,
eventually
I
that comes out as passive aggressiveness.
exactly. Sure, I don't mind doing that. I can't believe they're making me do
Yeah,
that kind of thing, right? That yes, and then. So what happens is it actually creates a split in our own
yes.
personality. I mean, you can even see it when I just did that. Sure, are you kidding? Right? And how many times have I acted like that? Instead of, and I think this is one of the reasons like you and I have gotten in these
Yeah.
conversations, is you got sick and tired. I mean, you were willing to hang into the relationship with me because I'm your mom,
Yes,
but you got sick and tired of me being
passive aggressive.
passive aggressive and not
Yes.
authentic.
No,
And
my
so
brother and I, we have some funny
yeah, yeah,
stories about we'll share, but we have a lot of PTSD around your passive
yeah,
aggressiveness
yeah, yeah.
because it would come out of nowhere to the fact that one time my mom, do you mind if I share this story?
No,
It's
I don't.
so funny.
It's a
One
funny story.
one time my mom she was on a new diet craze and she sent a book to my brother about diets. I don't know what it said. And
And
she said, would love your scientific feedback. He's a scientist and he does chemistry and biology and all of this, like, really the makeup of the body. And so he, in the most brilliant comeback
well,
ever,
he also struggles with his weight. So he
he took it as a
thought
passive
I
aggressive
was
comment.
trying to hint towards going on this
Yeah.
diet. Never even thinking about that, but
But
that's what
in
he
your
thought.
past, like, you sent me a letter at one time talking about my weight when I
Yeah.
was in
As opposed
college,
to
as opposed to
talking to you.
talking to me. So it would have been of your past. And he, in the most brilliant response ever, said nothing to her and instead mailed her a book about it was the ugliest book and it was
Cover.
like passive aggressive, like how to get over your passive aggressiveness. And he goes, would love your design opinion on this book. And to this day,
And I have to say, I
brilliant.
got it in a second because, first of all, he is really good aesthetics. Second of all, so for him to be asking me my design opinion was hysterical.
Oh my
But
gosh.
but that was a really turning a point of how everyone was perceiving me as not being authentic.
Yeah.
So you're going back to this language of authenticity.
Authenticity.
So one of the things that you have really helped me do, and you've been patient with me, is, you know, say it with your real words.
Yeah.
Use your direct meaning. Say it directly. Um,
Like, I'd rather know, even if it's tough in that moment, I'd
yeah,
rather know what you're truly feeling than find out 5 years down the road that you didn't want to do that with me
yeah,
or you didn't like what was happening there. Like, my intention is not to hurt you. And so I
yeah.
want to know if it's something that's frustrating you or rightfully so,
Yeah.
just
So
authentic.
so here's the challenge then. If we're going to have real relationships and if
Yeah.
we're going to really connect, it's all of this. It's all
It's
of the above
all
of
of,
what we're
yeah,
doing. It takes a lot of internal work
it does.
because in fact, it's funny, my great aunt used to say, you can't have a friend if you can't be a friend. You know what I mean?
Ooh,
I know.
I
I
love
loved
that.
it. But she's absolutely right. Is this idea that how can we have authentic relationships if we're not going to look at our own authenticity and if we're not going to be clear and if and you know um So this is interesting that you're
Yeah.
saying that. And this goes to all ages. It's not
Oh, totally.
20-somethings. It's not just 2-year-olds or, 5,
And all
whatever.
stages of life,
All
because I think there's
stages.
different points in life where you feel like you authentically know yourself, but then you don't know there might have been things that are, like, pushing your truth aside,
Yeah.
and you have to go and reflect on that again later. Like, we're
Yeah.
always changing and growth beings, but I think you said something really interesting about, like, your 2 sides when you're passive aggressive is sometimes you get so lost, you might not even know your
Yeah.
authentic self,
Yes.
and that's what also takes time to chip away. So
Yeah.
we're not saying this is an easy no, I don't think we've
No.
ever
No.
said any of this is
No, none
easy.
of it's
But I
easy.
think it's very clear we are all looking for better relationships out there. And in order to do those better relationships, we really need to unpack a lot of this. I hate to say it, colonialism, patriarchy,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
it's again circles around the same
Because
things.
we have this inherited nature that's making us competitive.
Yes.
We have this inherited nature that's making us be
Passive aggressive.
nice
Yes.
so that my mom used to say, peace at any price,
Yeah.
right? And it's costing us our relationships. And we have this sense of passive aggressiveness. And again, is it so deep that we're carrying generations of wounds that
Yeah.
we don't know how to free ourselves from? And part of I don't know about free. I don't know if we'll ever be free from those wounds, but we can't start imagining a new way of being without accepting and learning from our
Yeah.
own past and from the ways in which we were kind of trained.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I would ask everyone this week to
Yeah.
just kind of take reflection on what are some bad patterns you might be doing in friendship. I think, for example, like there's always a tendency of like, if you're a group of 5 people, but sometimes you always kind of leave out that one person, maybe they know you're leaving them out.
Yeah.
Kind of figure out why you're leaving them out. And if they're not a fit for the group, and that's a hard conversation, but it's a better conversation than continually leaving the person out. Or are you going out to dinner with a group of people and then you're singling out that you only really want to talk to one of them instead of talking to the whole group? Are you not being honest about, you know, engaging with a group? Like,
Or is
where
that
are
the place
you?
to do it?
Yes.
The thing is you're in a group. Could you think about doing that singled out conversation separately
Separately.
and then
Exactly.
being in group engagement
Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
space?
But no,
Because it's including. We're trying to include one another, aren't
yes.
we?
But it
Yeah.
was interesting. A lot of the studies said that a lot of female groups of friends, that's why I say this, they like to single out one person and feel like, again, groups of 4 or 5 or whatever, and only do like with the group of 4 and not the whole group. And so
Oh
there's
my
still
gosh,
something there
Jonelle, this
around
is
power.
so interesting because one of the topics I'm going to bring up in future weeks is this language of individualism. And this is so speaking into that. Now, I'm not going to do that next week, but
Anyways, but
oh,
just reflect on
yeah.
where you maybe could have been a better friend, and
And
then where you
including
might have to have,
others.
yeah, include others or have an honest conversation of what's working and what's not working for you, kind of thing. I think if friends are truly there, they'll understand and respect your boundaries if you can say it in a nice and authentic way. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah.
thank you, Jonelle. Thank you for joining us on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparks something in you, whether it's reflection, a new question, or a deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can also connect with us on Instagram, YouTube, Substack, TikTok, or White Women Wake Up. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. And like us, I'm listening to a really great podcast right now, and he keeps saying, you need to like us to pull our algorithms up.
Yes, please.
I do have to say, though, I took on Instagram, I took the like thing off because it was hard for me. I don't want to be measured. So anyways, but like us.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate your feedback. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and let's keep waking up together.
Bye.
Bye.
We are in all blush.
No, which is funny because it's summertime now, I know, summer in Seattle. What can you say?
Okay.